Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm David Atwell.
And I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to episode 50, Flawed, Weak, Organic. We'll start off with some Star Trek news.
And then we'll talk about Star Trek Discovery, Season 4, Episode 2, Anomaly.
And then we'll get into our audience question right after our main topic, Flawed, Weak, Organic. We're going to be talking about the representation of humanity in Star Trek First Contact that celebrates its 25th anniversary this month. It's going to be a great conversation. Stick around. Welcome back, guys. I'm glad you're here.
Back.
Yeah.
Yay.
Happy to be on board again.
Everybody gave much thanks this past week.
We did.
Indeed.
I'm glad. I got to cook my first turkey.
Oh, fun.
That was awesome. It's usually my dad's job, and I did it this year, and so, yeah, turned out well. I'm excited.
And everyone lived to tell the tale.
We did. We did. It was nice. I enjoyed it. I love cooking at Thanksgiving. Do you guys cook at all at Thanksgiving, or you just hang back?
I stay out of the kitchen, stay out of the way. I help, I clean the linens, and I help set up tables and move chairs around and things of that nature, but I do not go in the kitchen on Thanksgiving Day. More capable hands than mine have things firmly under control.
I actually helped make the mashed potatoes this year.
Yeah. That's one of the jobs my son likes to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's cool.
I saw somebody on Twitter was calling mashed potatoes a filler food and like trying to suggest that nobody really likes mashed potatoes. And I was like,
Dash.
I have actually craved mashed potatoes enough to like concoct an entire meal around mashed potatoes. Like
Yes.
I didn't know what the main dish was going to be, but I knew what the side was going to be, and so I was like, I don't understand this world that this person was coming from.
Nope.
I had to read the tweet a couple times to like comprehend the English language that he was using.
Wow. Yeah, no,
Maybe
I agree.
he was tweeting from the mirror universe where nobody likes mashed potatoes.
Everything's inside out.
Yeah, that's right.
They all have
I agree.
goatees, and they all hate mashed potatoes.
That's the only thing
right.
that makes sense. Yeah,
That's right. I'll tell you. Well, it's actually a Van Dyke, sir. But yeah, just as someone who used to wear one. But no, yeah, I agree, and I'm glad that we are all in agreement on mashed potatoes because while we don't normally get into any major doctrinal disagreements on the show, that I think might have caused some serious issues. So,
oh yeah,
I'm glad we're all there on the mashed potatoes.
yeah, yep.
Well, speaking of mashed potatoes, and in absolutely no way, but just because I need a transition,
Paramount Plus really mashed those potatoes.
Oh, I see what you did there.
They were about to mash the potatoes. I would like to say that I now have to retract a statement that I made last week, because I said that this whole thing with yanking, we're getting into the Star Trek news segment, by the way, folks at home. This whole thing with yanking Star Trek Discovery from the majority of the world was the worst thing that had been done by the higher ups in Star Trek since the cancellation of the original series. I've got to say, it would have been had those conditions persisted. But the original cancellation at the end of season 2. Star Trek was saved by a letter writing campaign led by the great B. Joe Trimble. And, I think we didn't, there wasn't a big deal made of it, but I really think we witnessed the contemporary social media version of that, because you could not go on Star Trek Twitter without hearing about this constantly. Like, there was nothing that anybody would say except, this is terrible, we hate this. Everybody in Star Trek, everybody around Star Trek, it was huge. And Star Trek, what am I saying? Paramount listened. Paramount heard us.
They did.
And they worked really hard, and they got their act together, and it's still not airing everywhere, but the majority of the world, I think by the time we were recording, I think everybody in the world who can has access either on Paramount Plus or Pluto TV. And that's really, really cool. I was impressed.
I agree. I know I made the joke already on Twitter, but I'm pretty sure that we can take at least some small amount of credit because, our episode dropped in the morning and they changed their mind by lunchtime.
That's right.
Saying.
I got to say, I think it was specifically our dressing down.
I don't think that we can take all the credit, but I think that we definitely pushed them over the top.
At least a majority. Let's say that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, yes. A large percentage.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're really excited about that. Congratulations to everybody who raised their voices, and congratulations. I mean, hurrah to Paramount for listening and doing the right thing. I commend that greatly. That's awesome.
Agreed.
Who else has a news? Mike, you haven't commented on this. Do you want to comment on it?
No, I don't actually. I'm very glad that that Paramount reversed course and made it available to fans in other countries. You know, Kevin, you and I, the last time we were on the show, the two of us, we talked about wanting to hear from international fans and more about their experience. And then this happened right after that episode dropped, and I thought, well, this isn't quite the way I was hoping it would happen, but
it did. That's well, I agree. It was again. I don't want to say our show influenced it, but you know, we did hear an international response, not specifically to our show. Okay, we're stretching this. So,
we shook
Mike,
that mountain of entertainment.
we shook the mountain of entertainment.
We shook the mountain of entertainment to its foundations.
Hey, I'm just saying, we had faith the size of a mustard seed, and we said to that mountain of entertainment, throw itself into the sea. And it threw itself overseas. I mean, I'm just saying.
Mike?
Now, I will say, though, Kevin, I will say,
yeah.
I don't know, that those letter writing campaigns back in the 60s took a lot of coordinated effort.
Yes.
And I'm not sure tweeting angrily at Paramount is quite the equivalent. But
well, it is.
Your overall point.
It is in terms of its effect, and it's basically
in terms of its effect,
they got the same number of letters. They were just really small, and there were lots, and they all
were
came
just
over
all
the
letters
internet.
of 280 characters or fewer.
I mean,
right?
the fact of the matter is, we just don't have to exert that kind of effort to be heard anymore. That the only reason it took more effort was because the technology wasn't there for people to be able to communicate the way they can now. So I feel like it's exactly the same level of fan response. And exactly the same kind of outcome in a much shorter time. So, I agree that no, there was no great organizer and hours of labor put in. But in terms of the communication from the fan community to the higher ups and the communication back, it's the same thing. This is how we do it in the 21st century. So.
Well, speaking of outcries and people wanting things, I've been fascinated this whole year by the fan effort to get LeVar Burton as the permanent host of Jeopardy!
Yes.
He didn't, of course, get that job. He did have a week guest hosting in the summer, and I thought he did a nice job.
And good riddance to Jeopardy! For it, by the way.
Well, I'm given to understand conditions were not as ideal for him as they were for some other guest hosts, and that's disappointing to hear. But that's in the rearview mirror because he decided he didn't really want the job after all, and he has moved on. And he's going to be actually now hosting a TV version of Trivial Pursuit.
Nice.
According to Variety. And this doesn't have a network or a premiere date or anything yet. And there's nobody we can tweet angrily at if it doesn't go well, and the whole world can't see it with us. But coming down the road at some point will be a LeVar Burton hosted version of Trivial Pursuit. So I don't know about you guys. I grew up playing Trivial Pursuit, even though I didn't know most of the answers because, it was all questions about the 60s and books I hadn't read, movies I hadn't seen, and sports I didn't follow. But I wanted to play. I mean, in 1982, that was the Christmas gift, was Trivial Pursuit. And the tradition in my family was you ask Santa Claus for a gift, you can be 99% sure you're going to get it. And it showed up unwrapped there under the tree on Christmas morning, that Genus edition of Trivial Pursuit. So this hits the Star Trek button, the LeVar Burton button, the nostalgia button. I'm in for this.
Was that a Star Trek Trivial Pursuit that you got?
No, but I did have one of those because shortly thereafter, other toy companies started cranking out trivia games for lots of different subjects, MASH, and I don't know what else. But I think the publisher's name was Golden Key or something like that, Golden Press. But I had Golden the Star Trek. Yeah, I had the Star Trek. It wasn't Star Trek Trivia, whatever they called it. I had the Star Trek Trivial Pursuit. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like probably a Star Trek trivia game or something. But there is a Star Trek edition of Trivial Pursuit, which I've played on multiple occasions, and yeah,
like a Hasbro, the actual brand.
Yes.
Trivial Pursuit.
Yes.
Oh.
Yep.
Well,
it's good. It's good.
There's
did
also a
not
Star
know.
Trek version of Settlers of Catan, and that would be a fun one to see.
Oh, yeah.
LeVar Burton
I have
host
played
a-
that game. In fact, that game is somewhere in my house, but I have not been able to find it for like 5 years now. My son really wants to play it again whenever he's home
Oh,
from college.
man.
He said, "You ever find that Star Trek Catan, Dad?"
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm sorry. So
Well, I'm excited about it. I think that's cool. I
Yeah.
think that's going to be a good
Let's
thing.
get LeVar Burton and more things.
Yes, LeVar Burton
Get him in everything.
and more things in general is just a good thing. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yep. So
maybe he should do a Reading Rainbow for grown-ups now.
He actually has a podcast where
He does, and it's-
reads sci-fi.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. Yeah, I like it.
That's cool. You say I need to check that out. I haven't heard.
Yeah.
It.
He reads, sci-fi short stories. Yeah.
See, I'm too busy making a podcast to listen to them. Oh boy. Well, David, I think you have another piece of Star Trek news for us.
I do. If you have missed the start of Star Trek Prodigy, or you don't have Paramount Plus, or are otherwise in need of catching up on that show, you can stream the first 2 episodes on Nickelodeon's website or on the Nick Cartoon Universe YouTube channel for a
Nice.
limited time. It'll also be on Nickelodeon on December 17th at 8 p.m. in the U.S., so you can catch up on the adventures of the Protostar and the holographic Captain Janeway, and fun fact, Lost and Found, which they're airing the opening 2-parter. Or although, as we discussed last week, we sort of feel like that might be a misnomer. But anyway, that was the second Star Trek episode ever to not feature any human characters.
Really?
Yep.
What was the first?
Living Witness from Voyager's, I think, 4th or 5th season.
Fascinating.
Yep.
Wow.
And it only 4th season, toward the end of the 4th season, it only featured holographic recreations of the Voyager crew.
Right.
Nice.
Wow, that's pretty cool. That's amazing.
Yep.
Well,
Holographic Janeway appears on both of those. I just
That's right. That's right.
Different holograms, but still.
could you imagine if it was the warmonger Janeway from Living Witness?
No, we loaded the wrong program. Oh wow, that's amazing. I'm just glad that I don't know if I'm glad or I'm kind of disappointed that Janeway didn't show up on Prodigy saying, "What is the nature of your starship emergency?"
That would be pretty great.
That'd be pretty cool.
Please state the nature of the command emergency.
Yeah, there you go. Please state the nature. I messed it up. Well, okay. I'm excited about that. That's good because, yet again, more accessibility for Star Trek is always good.
Yeah,
I'm always glad for that.
agreed.
So, speaking of Star Trek, how do you like my transitions this episode? Are they good? You like them?
Man.
You're firing on all thrusters, man.
Oh boy! Speaking of Star Trek, so this week's episode of Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Discovery Season 4, Episode 2, Anomaly. What'd you guys think?
Okay, well, I'll preface this by saying I don't know what you all thought of the season premiere, since I've only listened to halfway. I wasn't here. I've
We
only
loved
listened
it. We'll just be brief about it and say we loved it.
Good. Well, I will get there eventually. Right now, I'm in the middle of your call in with Ruth and really enjoying hearing from her. But
good.
I'll get to the disco discussion. But I liked it a lot too. I liked it quite a lot. So I felt a little let down by Anomaly, to be honest.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate always that Discovery is willing to deal with the after effects of traumatic experiences.
Yes.
And so, I found it very moving in the 3rd season when they did that. So I was a little disappointed to see them, I thought, kind of aping themselves in this episode. Like the scene at the end where Tilly is confiding in Culber that she's still shaken up about what happened on the station in the first episode, and it's an exact mirror of the scene with Detmer and Culber from last season.
Right.
And the importance of needing to ask for help and talk to people. And it kills me because all these are good, important themes, and I think they're true. But I saw that scene and thought, I've seen this before too recently from this show. And I felt I was glad to see Saru come back to the Discovery, but I felt it happened a little too easily. And I felt what I really appreciated about this episode, I'll put it this way, was I really enjoyed the main story a lot. I found it suspenseful. I found it dramatic. I found it exciting. I found it a wonderful tribute to thinking and acting scientifically and paying attention to science and going where the evidence leads.
Yes.
But I found I thought that could have been the episode, and I felt that the character moments felt forced to me in several places, even though I appreciated what they were trying to do. And again, I felt like I was ready to see something different. And again, I don't mean that to belittle what the show is doing, dealing with the character's trauma, or how that can be meaningful for viewers who are dealing with trauma.
Right.
We all are to a certain extent after this pandemic that we're still in the midst of. I don't know. I can only say I felt disappointed. I felt like if they're going to do that again, let's take it in different directions, and maybe they still will. But that's my initial reaction.
Yeah.
I can't say that I disagree. I think that the character moments were at least not handled as well as I have come to expect from Discovery. I thought that they missed a couple of beats, that they maybe rushed a couple of beats. I like what they were trying to do with the Tilly and Culber scene, trying to normalize therapy and also like simultaneously acknowledge the awkwardness of bearing your soul to someone that you know. And I like the fact that, like you mentioned, we're all sort of feeling off after this past 2 years. I liked all of that they were trying to do, but I agree that I felt like they didn't earn that character moment. I felt like they did work a lot more on earning Book's character moments, and I thought that they generally worked pretty well with those. But I agree that wasn't necessarily something that we haven't seen before. A character being distracted with their trauma response and not being able to function at full capacity. I feel like we've seen that in Star Trek, but also, as you mentioned, with Detmer last season in Discovery, and it sort of even like played itself out in a similar way. So I don't. Once again, I don't think that this is a bad episode. I enjoyed, like you said, a lot of the main sort of problem of the episode, but I also agree that the handling of the character moments were a little bit weaker than I've come to expect from Discovery. So yeah.
That's interesting. I kind of the one thing I will agree with is that this is something that happens in Discovery a lot, and I think it's due to the format. Just like in, say, Next Generation, particularly I think Next Generation, a lot of the episodes feel really rushed because we have 45 minutes and we really have a story that could take an hour or two to tell, or we have to give our characters some kind of emotional investment in order to tell the story with our characters. And that can often seem forced. So that always worked against Next Generation for me because of the episodic nature, that we really still weren't doing more than like 2-part episodes, and we weren't carrying big arcs very much either, and because that was still very much the law of the land.
Right.
And so when we get over to Discovery, I feel like there's a great flexibility within episodes because they can be varying lengths. And we've had, hour-long episodes. We've had, 35-minute episodes, I think, or something like that. I don't remember what the shortest one I've seen is. But it was less than 45 minutes. And so, there's that kind of flexibility. There's also the scope and the scale and the kinds of stories that we can tell. We can have those arcs that go over the course of the seasons. But with these, and I've often, I've long said that Star Trek would do better with the same amount of resources but lower episode order, because I felt sometimes the writing especially was spread too thin over the course of like 26 episodes. And so some of that has been remedied in this era because of the flexibility within the episodes, because not only are the same resources allocated, but more resources are given per season. And we
Right.
do have that shorter episode order, which does help us. But, and again, I don't know how many episodes we're getting this season, but I have noticed over the course of Discovery, as the episode order went down from 15 to 14 to 13, things started, even though there were good things happening, they felt a little rushed. David, you and I talked about last episode about the Hugh, Paul, Adira, Gray family feeling rushed into existence. Even though we
Right.
love it and it's beautiful and we're glad it's there, it came in. It just not much, but like we just needed a little more for the characters to build that, before Paul thinks of himself as a dad without having ever really formally adopted Adira,
Right.
things like that have happened, and it's, I think, due to the fact that we've got to get these big stories told in these relatively short episode orders. And so something like Saru coming back, we all wanted Saru to come back. We're all glad Saru came back. I would have appreciated having 2, maybe 3 episodes of Saru on Kaminar,
Right.
instead of a few scenes in one episode and then bringing him onto the Discovery, which I'm glad he's there, and he functioned
Right.
really well in this episode too.
Mm-hmm.
Played an important role. But
Yes.
that's the kind of thing that I felt rushed about. What you guys are saying about the character moments, I have to kind of disagree. I mean, I understand that, yeah, we're kind of doing the same thing in this scene with Culber and Tilly that we did with Detmer and Tilly, but at the same time, I'm sorry, Detmer and Culber, with Detmer and Culber, but at the same time, I didn't want that moment to be a one-off. I didn't want that to be here's
Agreed.
our token representation of getting help when you're going through stuff, and to have the character that so many people have, that's such a fan favorite, being in that position and not just one of the lower ranking members, I thought was a good thing.
That's a good point, because up until that point, we didn't really know much about Detmer,
Right.
last season.
Yep.
What was your take on the relationship between kind of hologram Stamets and Book? I mean, one thing with, of course, I wasn't here for the discussion last week and haven't heard it yet, but I will say with the family, there were like either 3 or 5 months, I forget which, between the events of season 3 and Kobayashi Maru. So there's been time for
I'm
a
talking about
family to build.
for at this point, but I'm talking about within season 3.
Oh, okay.
But,
okay.
but yes,
sort of one
Okay,
episode.
point well
granted.
taken.
Then
that
I
people
then
have
I
moved on
agree.
by
But
now, yeah.
but
yeah.
well, so then I felt like, again with Stamets, unless I missed it, and it's possible, I'm not infallible, but I didn't, this resentment, or not resentment, but anxiety he has around Book seemed to come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I thought, I didn't buy it. I mean, nice scenes, well written, well acted, but I didn't buy the premise that he's anxious because Book can activate the spore drive too, and because Book's very presence reminds him of what he almost lost. Am I missing something? Or
I don't think you are. I didn't see it either, and I agree. I think that they should have built that up more, at least put a single scene about it in Kobayashi Maru. But that said, I loved the portrayal of that problem within the Anomaly.
Yeah.
Where Stamets and Book's stakes are very different. Like one of them is present, one of them is not. One of them has another chance, the other one does not. It's a really interesting disparity, and I think that it goes to the nature of every time we're dealing with someone who has felt loss or who has experienced some deep trauma, that you sort of feel alone even when somebody is near you.
Yes.
Book says, you're not even here, no one's here. And that,
Right.
I don't think he's talking about piloting the ship.
Right.
And the whole interaction between those two characters is really compelling, I think, because it does so much to really make real or make concrete this feeling that we have, whether we are the person who has experienced trauma or we're talking to the person who has felt a great loss. We feel this difference, this separation. And I think that it does, as I have said over and over again, Star Trek is at its best when it's making an abstract concept concrete so that we can look at it and experience it in new ways. And this did that in not only a really adept way, but a really like subtle way, to the point where you feel the feeling of it, but you maybe don't necessarily connect all the dots until later. I thought it was beautifully done and very well told, just how that interaction worked itself out, and how that was the key. Figuring out how to make that work was the key to unlocking Book, and everybody who's gone through trauma has a different way of unlocking them. I don't think that talking to everyone who has lost someone is the right way necessarily to make the connection there. But I thought that it was beautiful the way that it worked here, and I thought that the commentary that they're making on loss and on trauma was really adept and really elegant.
Yeah, I think you're bang on there, and it's not just about that emotional isolation that people feel, but
right.
That actual physical distance that we have, that even though we're communicating digitally, in some way, it's different that we're not in the same room. And it's been very hard for me personally. I mean, one of the things that I related to, for me personally, having people in my life who I love, who are going through very difficult times when we cannot be together.
Yeah. And
trying to be present for them at a distance is a particular challenge. And also trying to receive that presence when you're at a distance, is also a challenge, because just the fact that you're having to do it over the phone, or you're having to do it over video chat or text or whatever it is, it can't help but emphasize the loneliness that you feel, the isolation that you feel. And when you can't remedy that with physical closeness, boy, that's a really, really difficult thing to overcome. So I thought that was beautiful in the scene, Paul trying to say, I'm here. And again, yeah, I agree that this thing between Paul and Book was not really set up well. But at the same time, yeah, we do have 5 months of history where clearly this thing happened. So as long as we get to this moment, that's good. But it would have been nice to have something. But still, I agree. I think it's a beautifully done scene.
And if they build on it and continue the connection between these two characters and don't just let it drop, then all's forgiven.
Well,
because I agree with David. I think it was the scenes themselves were quite compelling.
Yeah. Well, and also it lays over into the communication between Michael and Book, when he has to ride the wave to get back in, the surfing or whatever, that he has to get back in, and she's talking him through, okay, you got to try again. It's a very Star Trek moment, right, where we've got to do the thing, the technological thing, at the exact moment, or we're going to die, So it has to happen, and there's always the countdown. For some reason, we know exactly how many seconds something's going to take, and so we count it down, And we didn't have quite the countdown this time. But at the same time, there's another layer to it there that was really good, because there's a strong character moment that's related to it, that's wrapped up in it. And that was really the moment. That was really the thing. Like, doing the technological thing was there, but it was about Book overcoming the emotional hurdle and the psychological hurdle that he had to, and about the connection between Book and Michael, which I thought was really great in this episode too. The way his struggles put a strain on their connection, and her trying to connect with him, and the interesting thing that while she's right next to him, he doesn't even really want her around, but when they're communicating at a distance for this this technological thing that they have to do to save him, which he's probably not even sure he wants to be saved. That's when she's able to break through, and that's when they're able to connect. And that moment where their hands make the same motion, at almost exactly the same time, it's such a great moment of like really them really connecting and working as a unit. Right. And I loved that. I thought that was beautiful.
Agreed. I thought that whole scene, if it had been accompanied with with Michael and Book, as we've talked about, there has been a good deal of build up on their relationship, and we talked last week about how we feel like there's a lot of veracity to it and a lot of really emotional depth to the way that it's been put together. I think that if they had built up the Stamets Book relationship a little bit more, even just one or two more scenes, I think that would have been like just a stellar, like over the top, like memorable moment from this series.
Yeah, I agree. But nonetheless, all well done and beautifully executed. And
yes,
I love. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I also really love the fact that we're seeing Tilly being in a position of being looked up to after 3 seasons of like she's the one being the one looking up to others. It's a beautiful level of character growth for her. You know, we see, you know, little incremental character growth in a lot of other characters throughout Discovery and Picard, and you know, and even Deep Space Nine as well, and maybe a little bit in Next Generation. But we don't see anything quite as dramatic as this complete role reversal that Tilly has, and I loved being able to see that. Like that, to me, really justifies the existence of this sort of peak TV moment. You know, we have this completely different way of doing things nowadays with television, and I loved the fact that we were getting into this growth in her character in a really meaty way because of this peak TV. I thought that was great.
Yeah, I like that a lot too, and I feel like maybe I'm forgetting, but I feel like this is the first episode where Mr. Reese has really been able to make a substantial contribution out of his background and experiences. You know, he's the one who gives them the metaphor of surfing, kite surfing, to think about this problem and to what Book has to do to solve it. And I love how at the end, I think it's Saru who says to him, "May we all cultivate such life-saving hobbies." You know, Saru talked in the prologue of the episode about how we spend our moments is so important, and then at the end, he's bookending that with the way Mr. Reese has spent his moments kite surfing. Turned out to have a very salvific edge to it.
I do want to just clarify here. We're talking about Bryce. We're talking about.
I'm sorry,
Lieutenant Commander Bryce. Yes, Reese is the one who was. The captain who was acting captain who had the con while Burnham was off the Discovery in the last episode.
My mistake.
Yes,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bryce and Bryce was not there for Kobayashi Maru, or he was for one scene, but he hadn't been there. He hadn't been on the bridge yet. There was somebody else taking his place. I imagine there was a casting reason for that, like somehow the actor wasn't available for that episode, most of that episode or something, and just was able to shoot the one scene. I don't know. It was weird.
Yeah.
But they had Lieutenant Christopher in his place. But
as long as they don't come back in 15 years having him know something from that episode that he wasn't there for, it's all good.
Because he kept somebody waiting for the restroom. And,
that's right.
Yeah.
But that was great. I actually love that, and I love that you bookend that. I did not notice that connection between what Saru said about how we spent our moments and cultivating life-saving hobbies. I think that's beautiful, and I think it's great too because it reminds us, or it reminds me in this moment as we're talking about it, of the importance of having a robust human existence, of not just limiting ourselves to one thing. And you know, I of course view this philosophically and theologically as well, as kind of the first thing that comes to my mind. But that being that, you know, we so often sort of put our faith in a box, you know, put ourselves in a box of either doing one job and that defining us, or our faith living over in this corner and not affecting everything else. What that really shows, that demonstrates and connects to for me, is the interconnectedness of all of life, and living life on all of those different levels, and realizing that nothing is truly wasted, that all our experiences shape us. And when we recognize that from a theological standpoint, that all of our experiences shape us, that's where we can start to see that there's sacredness everywhere. That everything really is sacred because the shaping of our lives is a sacred process, and you never know what you're going to draw on in any given moment. And I find that a lot just in my writing and speaking and just in interacting with other people, and teaching my son, raising my kid and telling him, what he needs to know about the world. It's like, oh yeah, I know about this thing that can help him understand this other thing that I have had no clue about to this moment, And so, I don't know, that's an important idea for me, and I really like that. I appreciate you for bringing that up.
Well, and it is, I agree, very human. And what else is human is that we're all really squishy. And so the fact that they still don't have seatbelts on the Discovery after 1,000 freaking years, they still don't have seatbelts, and they've apparently installed flamethrowers in the walls. That really...
Well, the doors that open and let the cables dangle down were just too expensive, to maintain. The flamethrowers are a lot easier, You just put the propane in and
gotta gas
forget
them up.
about it until later.
Yep.
There's no
Right.
reset, it just goes off and you're done.
The pyro, as good as this season of Disco has been so far, the pyro is out of control on the bridge.
It is. And it always has been to one degree or another, but we can do it.
It's just visibly out of control right now.
Yes.
And and without seatbelts, with seatbelts, the main danger of this episode would be lessened significantly. Just install some. Programmable matter seatbelts.
Yeah, that's right. There is that deleted scene from Star Trek Nemesis.
Oh, that's right.
That shows seatbelts, being installed, and boy. That was in the 24th century, but I guess
but remember, in the motion picture, we know those arms can fold over people's laps.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
Yeah.
Which
must be technology that got lost in the burn.
It must be.
But apparently, we're bringing back synthetic bodies to give Gray an embodied existence,
and a name drop of Picard.
And
and it's interesting that
felt almost like a little cross promotional there, but
yeah. Well, it's also a spoiler for anybody who hasn't seen Picard. But
it is, isn't it?
But then it's also interesting because he's talking about they tried it, but it was abandoned, and it's like what's going to happen to Jean-Luc?
Well, and then what's going to happen to Gray? Maybe this is planting the seeds of something troubling for Gray if they go this route, and those old flaws in the technology come back to bite them. I don't know. Yeah.
Gray has had enough trouble. He deserves to, get some space.
I think
I'm not wishing ill on Gray. You understand?
No, of course not. Of course
just speculating.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. With Picard, I think that if they have any trouble with the body, Q can just make it go away. One way or another. So, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, you're organic again, Jean-Luc. Mon Capitan.
This time it'll be Picard who wants to be the real boy.
Oh, boy.
I just liked the echo of Book saying to Stamets, "Stop talking," and it reminded me. It had echoes of Stamets telling Tilly in I think season 1 or 2. Repeat after me. I will say. Fewer things.
Fewer words. Yes, that's right.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good observation. Yeah.
That is.
I don't think there's anything deeper than that, but I liked it. The other thing too was I felt like there was a real Burnham with Burnham and Culber. I felt like there was a real Picard-Troy sort of relationship or interaction, where he's on the bridge to basically tell her how other people are feeling. And it's just about as helpful as Troy was, with that, I don't know, it's a really stressful situation, so it could be either way.
Yeah.
Wait, you thought Culber was not helpful?
No, because in the middle of it,
not much she can do.
Yeah, she's like, do you think that he's telling the truth? Do you think he's okay? Can he keep going? And Culber's like, well, it's a really high stress situation, so maybe he can, maybe he can't. I don't know. And it felt like a lot like with Picard and Troy when it really matters, when he really needs to know, Troy's like, I'm sorry, Captain, it's unclear,
Right. Someone's hiding something. Yeah.
Right.
That's a good point. Although I do think Culber's is the ship's counselor to a certain degree.
Yes, he is.
He is, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely
So I was struck by that too. And of course, McCoy did the same thing with Kirk.
Though his usually took the form of whiskey.
Well,
Yeah.
but there are those scenes in motion picture where you're pushing. Your people know their jobs.
Right.
So he's there to be
true.
the voice of emotion. Don't forget these are real people feeling real things. So that's some fine Starfleet tradition there.
And that
Medical
is
doctors filling that role.
and that is honestly what I'm loving about Discovery, is that it feels more than ever like real people feeling real things. There's that moment this episode between we talk about that scene between Culber and Tilly, but then at the end of it, she's like, I'm gonna go look up that data.
Yes.
They're being all goofy, like they were blowing a take or something, but it made it to the show, and it was fantastic. Because it's so human and normal and great. And there was even a moment last episode that I didn't bring up, which is just because I'm such a Blue Del Barrio fan, but when the crash happens, and Adira comes out and they're like, we were okay, everything was fine, and they are so rattled, and just the look on their face, like right then, it was so believable. Like if you've seen somebody who's been through a trauma and is shaking from it, that's what they look like. Like that's exactly what they look like. And it was just like, there's so many moments like that are so emotionally credible and so relatable and so real and so naturalistic. It just makes me very, very happy.
Yeah.
So
That interaction between Adira and Tilly is beautiful. Tilly saying, you did a good job, and then
oh yes,
and then Adira just sort of like surprised, like, so that Tilly is giving Adira what Tilly had wanted from Stamets in seasons 1 and 2 and didn't get, and now finally is able to give that same gift to Adira when they've done this amazing thing, and it just is a really lovely moment. But you're right, completely realistic. That reaction of like, whoa, complete shock that you actually gave me the validation that I was hoping for, and also like really the starstruck like joy of like I got to tell somebody about the fact that I just got complimented by my superior officer. Like, this is great.
Well, and the fact that, and I think the mirror image of what you're mentioning is that Tilly was Stametsing Adira there.
Yes,
in the prior moment between them, where she was getting impatient with them and barking at them, and I mean she was right, but
right,
but it was like maybe not necessary, and also not taking into account and not recognizing how much Adira looked up to her,
right?
And having Hugh tell her that, is like, oh, I don't want to Stamets Adira.
Right. Yeah.
So that was great to see. I love the dynamic in those scenes. Again, like there's so much that just feels so real, and like the nervousness and the tension and the anxiety of that moment, and people blurting out things that they probably shouldn't say, like that's, I love that. I love it.
And you didn't have Hugh saying, "That's my husband you're talking about. Watch your mouth." You had him being like, "No, yep, that sounds about right." That's exactly how he is. And also, you should probably be better than that. If you have the ability, I am hereby calling you to a higher reaction. So.
She didn't say anything specifically about Paul, did she?
She did. She said, "I totally Stametsed."
She did. She said that.
I'm totally Stametsing. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. I just started using his name as a verb just here on the show without realizing that was in the episode. I guess I missed it.
That's straight out of her mouth. Yep.
Well, there you go. Yep. But yeah, no, you're right. It's great that Paul has a tendency to get a little more precious about his people than Hugh does. Hugh can still like talk about his family without like too much privileging them,
Right.
Whereas Paul, I don't think can. Paul tends to be. It's so funny because Paul was so kind of gruff at the beginning of the series, and we're learning how emotionally vulnerable he is, and I love that. It's beautiful. So,
I also think it's interesting how, just in a completely unrelated topic, we had all of this sort of weeping and gnashing of teeth when the first promo for Discovery Season 4 came out about the redesign of the Ferengi, right?
Yes.
And then, as it turned out, there was exactly the entirety of that character's appearance, at least so far, on screen, was in that promo. That 3/4 of a second of a reaction shot was it. And gosh, sometimes Star Trek fans are just the worst. Just if you just waited.
And that Ferengi's a captain, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah,
I believe
So
so,
that's
yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah,
That is cool.
definitely. I mean, I think it's great that he's in there, and I think that it's great that there's there's some continuity between Next Generation era Trek and Discovery. That the Ferengi are apparently, or at least one Ferengi is still part of the Federation.
Right.
But gosh, that the fact that everybody was up in arms about that redesign, and it turned out to be a all of 1 second appearance of that character.
Well, you just wait, because that Ferengi captain is going to be very important this season.
Mm-hmm.
That guy's going to have an arc like you wouldn't believe. He's going to go through a whole.
I think he's going to save the universe in the last episode.
He's probably going to save the universe.
Yeah.
And then he'll turn out to not actually be a Ferengi, and then the whole thing will be blown sideways.
Right.
That'll explain the looks.
And then the only thing that
Surgically altered to look like a bad Ferengi.
right. And then the only thing that Star Trek fans will have to be mad about is the fact that this episode shares a title with an episode of Enterprise Season 3.
It does?
It does.
Oh, man.
Well, that's very anomalous.
Yeah. Enterprise
not good.
Season 3, Episode 2, Anomaly.
Oh, no.
The first time in the Star Trek franchise that an episode title has been recycled verbatim.
Wow.
Of course, we had. We
Well,
have
if it's
been close.
one time in 55 years, we're doing all right.
Yeah,
Right.
We had Emissary and The Emissary.
Yep, we had the Siege and the Siege of AR 552, or whatever the number was. We had First Contact and First Contact.
Well, there you go.
Speaking of which,
That's an episode in the movie, but
Speaking of which.
speaking of First Contact, that movie turned 25 this month. Can you
Man,
believe
that
it?
is hard to
You
believe.
Crazy. I remember going to see that movie in the theater.
Yep.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
And I went with a few friends. And this was kind of my closest circle of friends. And one guy was like, we were I think we were sitting in the movie seats, in the theater seats, waiting for the movie to start. Or it might have been before, when we were talking about the movie, because we were all excited about seeing the new Star Trek movie, right? Even though we had all seen Generations, we were still excited about the new Star Trek movie. And so he said, okay, the one thing that I want from this movie, just the only thing, is for somebody at some point to say, assimilate this.
Well,
And so when the dish is flying off, and Worf takes his phase arrival, assimilate this, we cheered. We were like, yeah!
wow.
and he hadn't seen the trailer? Because I believe that was in the trailer, or the second trailer.
I don't know. I don't think so. We saw it on open
All right.
day. It was pretty, and
If
I
you
don't
say
know,
he was
so.
sincere in that,
He was sincere.
Good on
yeah.
him.
Now it's possible. It's possible that I didn't know that. So if that's true, then he might have been playing us. I don't know. Boy, after
Well, there's
25
no denying
years,
it was an exciting thing to see. I was excited when the first trailer, it was just a teaser trailer that was a Borg cube that took the shape of the Starfleet Delta by the end.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
nothing but the promise of the Borg, and I was out of my mind with excitement. I thought
Right.
that teaser trailer was, and it was before we used terms like teaser trailer, but
Right.
oh, that was so exciting, and yeah, it was such a great, fun movie to watch in the theater. My wife and I were in seminary at the time. We went back to campus and told people what we'd seen, and we're saying, we'll go see it again if you want to see it too. That's the first Star Trek movie I'd ever had that experience of actively wanting to share it with non-Star Trek fans, because I knew they'd like it. It's like The Wrath of Khan, like The Voyage Home. It's got across the board appeal.
Right.
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you, if I find out after 25 years that guy was putting us on, I'm going to be really upset. But but I wouldn't put it past him either. Yeah, no, it really does. I think it works on such an accessible level, and explains its own mythology.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because
Yeah.
we have the Lily character to whom we have to explain the Borg. And because we're explaining Zephram Cochrane to himself, you know,
Yeah.
that does. I hadn't thought about that, but that does make it rather an accessible film for non-Star Trek people. So that's a good point. Although it's not a great representation, much like Star Trek 4, not a great representation of what Star Trek generally is. It's a bit of a standout because it's kind of a horror movie. Or at least a suspense thriller, you know, with some horror movie elements. But yeah, it's considered one of the great Star Trek films, one of the best. Certainly, most people consider it the best of the Next Generation films.
Yep,
Yeah,
I
I
consider
do.
it my favorite of all of the Star Trek films.
And I want to hear why. I've been interested in this for a while because you've mentioned that on the show before.
Yes. Yeah, so I mean, I realize that I am way out in left field here with First Contact as my favorite, and even more so with Undiscovered Country as my second favorite. You know, I don't put Wrath of Khan till third. I realize that that's a pretty wild claim to make.
It's okay.
No, so I really love the fact that we're dealing with Picard's greatest nemesis and his greatest wound, and we're dealing with it in a feature-length way. We're making it a real battle between him and the Borg Queen for the fate of humanity, for the soul of his friend Data. We're making it a real actual debate between Starfleet and the Borg as to who has the better philosophy and which one will win out. We're seeing a lot of world building. We're seeing what the world looked like, the world of Starfleet looked like in 2063, which, speaking of which, that's now currently only 40 years away, 42 years away, I guess, now at this point.
We're in trouble.
Yeah, right.
I wish the Vulcans would hurry it up a little bit.
Yeah, right. Zephram Cochrane is alive somewhere right now as a little 10-year-old.
Sorry, I'm just picturing myself at 80 years old, you know, going, the Vulcans, have they come yet? Sorry.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Yep. Yeah, but there's that world building element. It's just a really solid story from beginning to end, by Berman, Braga, and Moore, and directed by Frakes with a lot of visual flair that, obviously he doesn't get the opportunity when he's directing the television show to do quite as much.
Right.
So it just has all of the elements and all of the pieces necessary. It's also of the crews that have a film version, it is my favorite crew. I've always resonated more with the Next Gen crew than the original series crew. Of course, Voyager is the one that I think I sort of gravitate toward the most nowadays. But the Next Generation crew, especially at the time, was my absolute favorite, and Data was maybe my favorite character. So just all of it together just rolls up into not only an enjoyable film and a really suspenseful film, but I think a fairly meaningful film.
Yeah.
So that's why I put it in my first place spot, and we'll have to talk about Undiscovered Country at some point to find out why I put that in my number 2 spot.
Yes, we will. We could probably talk about it later this year for the 30th anniversary.
For sure.
Yeah, but I think you're spot on a lot of that, and I don't rank it above a lot of other Star Trek films, but I think you're right in your assessment of it in many regards. And you talk about Frakes' ambition, Frakes' visual style in this film. I mean, certainly today, we throw that camera around all over the place, in the post, especially after Justin Lin. Woo, boy!
Right.
But even Frakes in season 2 of Discovery, there's a shot where I was like, stop it, stop spinning the camera, stop doing it. But he, to think in 1996. this long, slow pull-out through this Borg cube, from Picard's eye all the way out, to this huge, Borg ship. And there's no really clear transition moment in it. It doesn't look fabricated. It doesn't look patched together. It's very smooth and clean. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff in this film that's very that still looks very credible and very good, and has held up beautifully. And
there's a lot of craft to it.
Yes, there is, and that's even when we see through like the Borg drone's eyes of Jean-Luc and Lily walking through the corridors, and it's all wonky looking, and we hear their voices and they sound like Borg voices. That's really interesting. We've never seen that before, just quite in that way. And it also upgraded the look of the Borg, to be a lot scarier and more detailed.
They had that feature budget.
Yeah,
Star Trek redesigning characters again.
Oh, I know.
I didn't hear anybody complaining in 1996 that those aren't the way the Borg look like.
Well, you hardly recognize the Borg anymore. I mean, they don't look anything. Well, Mike, what's your kind of overall for this picture?
Oh, it's very high on my list. I think it's probably right neck and neck with Star Trek II. Push comes to shove, I'd put Star Trek II first, probably for sentimental reasons, because that really was it wasn't when I became a Star Trek fan, but it was my introduction to Star Trek. But First Contact, I don't know that it's, I mean, it's interesting. You say it's not an, what was the phrase you used? Not an accurate representation, or not a, I don't think
I
that's
also
exactly
disagree with this.
I think it's pretty much quintessentially a Star Trek movie, with its emphasis on the centrality to its plot of the vision of a hopeful future. I mean, everything hinges on that. When that scene when Riker and Troy and Geordi are getting Cochrane to look through the telescope at the Enterprise, the clunky line about "you're astronauts on some kind of Star Trek" aside, which I never have liked that line much, but that whole scene of holding this vision up to the guy who is, one of the key reasons it happens, and and convincing him that this is worth making an effort for and striving for, and lay off the sauce and fly your rocket, dude, because and telling him all the things that are going to change, and he's compelled by it. I think the audience is compelled, and then at the end when the Vulcans show up. And as an aside, in Star Trek novels and so forth, various versions, but it had been kind of quote unquote established that the Vulcans were the first aliens humans met. And I was thinking, as the ship came down, as the ramp was lowering, I was thinking, boy, they better get this right. They better get this right. And yes, sure enough, he throws back his hood and it's a Vulcan. Yay. So I could breathe easy. But that's such a beautiful moment, and it's the iconic alien race of Star Trek, and they present the iconic greeting, and then Cochrane holds out his hand. He can't do the salute. It's a beautiful moment, and and Picard telling Lily, "You have so much to look forward to. I envy you." I think I guess Star Trek's not always such relentless suspense and action, for sure,
right?
But I think its heart is quintessentially a Star Trek.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But that's more what I had in mind. I mean, just in the same way that Star Trek isn't usually such broad comedy as Star Trek IV. Sure. It's also not usually such suspense and horror stuff as First Contact is.
So it would be interesting to know, and there's no way to know. It'd be interesting to know how many people became Star Trek fans because of those two films, where they had the biggest breakout appeal, and people said, "Oh, I didn't know Star Trek could be like this." And so even the fact that it's not always like that or usually like that, I don't think negates the fact that there's enough in the DNA of those movies and Star Trek. Some people say the same about Star Trek too. Oh, it's so militaristic. It's not a good representation of Star Trek.
That's true.
But there's so much of Star Trek's essential DNA in all three of those across the board appealing films. Really, my favorite Star Trek series, quote unquote, is that run of theatrical films from,
Right.
So, Yeah,
Which is
they
quite
made me a Star Trek fan ultimately.
right, and it's quite a bit different from the original series in many ways.
Yeah.
It's it's a new way of telling Star Trek stories, and so yeah, no, I don't for a moment say that it couldn't make people Star Trek fans. It's just it's off the beaten path maybe
Sure.
of what Star Trek was doing at the time, which may be part of what makes it more relatable.
Sure.
So the title of the episode that we settled on when we started is Flawed, Weak, Organic. And it comes from that line that the Borg Queen delivers to Data, saying, "We were once like humans, flawed, weak, organic." And she says organic in a very pejorative way, in a very distasteful way, even though they are all, like the Borg cannot exist without their organic components, which is central to the resolution of this story.
Right.
When Data releases the gas into the area and it eats up all the flesh, all the organic bits, and that kills the Borg Queen, that's very interesting all in itself, because even though the Borg despise the organic, they still incorporate the organic, which means that the organic has value. But then, when they're undone by their organic parts, that means that their organic nature, their organic elements, are their weakness in this episode.
Yes. Well, and I would take it even a step further and say that the Borg Queen's humanity was the Borg's downfall, but Data's humanity was everyone's salvation.
Yeah. Talk to me about
Nicely
that.
put.
Well, I think that during the entire probably second half of First Contact, they draw a very sharp parallel between the Borg Queen, who is trying to draw the organic and the synthetic together in some sort of unholy union, and Data, who is a synthetic creature who is trying to become more and more human and has in many ways succeeded in that goal. And when the Borg offers Data some measure of humanity superficially, it's this temptation of the flesh that we sort of talked about a little bit in the Spooky Trek episode, and that she references specifically, the Borg Queen does in this episode or in this movie, where she's actually saying, don't be tempted by the flesh, rip that skin from your arm. But it's just superficial, because the true nature of Data's humanity is within himself, and that is because he is able to actually connect with that humanity, that not the humanity that she provided him, but the humanity that he already had. He's able to pull the wool over her eyes, pretend to be on her side, but you sort of see this little glint in his eyes as he is waiting this microsecond to fire those quantum torpedoes. You see his hand hovering over the control, waiting, and then hitting it. And that's just long enough to miss the Phoenix and to make this dramatic moment happen. But it's this little element of his humanity which is already there, asserting itself. And that is humanity's salvation, that's Data's salvation, and that's the Borg's downfall, because she thought in her humanity, in her hubris, that she was perfect, that she was approaching perfection at least, and that her way was correct and would be proven out that way. Her humanity weakened her. It was her downfall, but because Data had a core of humanity that was not superficial, that was not trying to attain perfection through, frankly, at all. It was not trying to attain perfection. It was trying to attain more humanity. He was able to save everyone.
I think it's very interesting, and I think you're right about that for sure, about the essential nature of Data's humanity not being about the skin. I think it is interesting when we talk about Data as a Christ figure, which we did on a previous episode. I think it's episode 33, 33 or 34. Programmed to be Human is the name of the episode, and so go there to learn more about why I think of Data as a Christ figure. But what's interesting about this episode is we see him sort of take on some of the nature of a Christ figure in a deeper way. One of those ways is being tempted, as we said, for 0.68 seconds.
Right.
which for an android is an eternity.
Mm-hmm.
But also the engrafting of the skin onto him. He is the superhuman, that is the android, literally taking on flesh.
Oh, interesting.
Which is an element of the incarnation.
Uh-huh.
And of course,
I mean, incarnate,
right? Is,
literally
right.
in flesh, yeah.
Right. I mean, it is the core of it is the core of what incarnate. It is the core of what incarnate means, right? But it is an element of it in that there's a great deal more, belonging to that significantly theologically,
right?
But so that's interesting that this sort of element of incarnation in this physical sense happens with him, and like you're saying, I think it's a beautiful moment when he's being attacked by he's breaking out. He's being attacked by the drones, and one of them swipes at his arm, and he's bleeding. And that stops him. And that's when the Borg Queen says, "Look at you, cradling that flesh, that's supposed to not mean anything to you." That's what she says. Tear it from your arm as you would a faulty circuit. Resist the temptations of the flesh, which is really interesting. Of course, then he doesn't, which we know later he's playing her. But it's really interesting because the idea of flesh as weakness is not the same as the idea of humanity as weakness, but it also, and I think that's very important when we talk about things theologically regarding, Paul's discussion of the spirit and the flesh. I mean, that's the metaphor that he used regarding the desires of his that were baser, the desires of his that were not rooted in spirit. There are human desires that we have that are good desires that we should encourage, and that humanity is filled with all kinds of good things. But there are those things that would reduce us merely to our flesh. That is, to sort of our animalistic existence. That it's all about me and my survival, and that's it. It's all about my greedy little needs, And we don't make that distinction really well in Christian culture about what constitutes humanity, to the point that when we're talking about Star Trek, it's often, you talk about humanism and Christians immediately run the other way, a lot of them.
Right.
Because if it's humanistic, it's bad. As though our humanity is bad. Because it's flawed and weak and organic, right? Because of this concept that, everything human is sinful.
Right.
But what Data is showing is demonstrating, because the Borg Queen, like you point out, I think it's great that you point this out. Borg Queen has the things that Data is now getting. Like, she has flesh, and she has inorganic parts as well, and she has emotions, which is a new thing for Data. Which he is able to switch off in this movie, and we can talk about how the weirdness of the emotion ship, but let's not get into that right now. But she has all those things, right? And yet she is, one of the best words we can use to describe her is inhuman. Because, she talks about, they have that conversation about the Borg bettering themselves. And he says, no, you don't improve, you conquer.
Right.
We talked before about the Borg not incorporating things into themselves in a convivial sense. But rather incorporating themselves by mining it. They take what they want, and they suppress the rest, and then use whatever material they want to their own benefit, and be that organic or inorganic material. So there's definitely that push and pull and that back and forth between two views of what one should strive for, and what perfection really is. And what humanity really is. And I think you're absolutely right. It's Data's essential humanity that wins the day. Over some of the things that the Borg Queen has that might affect with an A, humanity.
I think that's absolutely right. And not only an affectation of humanity, but maybe even like a almost a human-like disdain for it, that she's aping it, but also like in the same breath hating it. She's kind of a Gnostic in that regard, thinking that everything that is of the flesh is evil, everything that is of this world is evil, and all I care about then is the transcendent, the perfection. we get a little bit more of that with 7 of 9, where she talks about how the Borg seek perfection in all things, and we see that with the organic molecule and everything. This is the beginning of the Borg being almost a religious force within Star Trek. They have the religion of perfection. They pursue this integration, this perfect integration of organic and synthetic. And I think that Gnostic viewpoint that says that all that we care about is the transcendent, and the physical is meaningless, to the point where the Borg Queen can give it to Data as just sort of a whimsical thing to try to get his allegiance, because it has no value to her. Obviously she's harvesting this skin from other Enterprise crew members, which we don't really talk about much when we talk about this, but she's obviously got this stuff harvested from other, but she doesn't care about those bodies, right? She doesn't care about any bodies. She sends drones to their deaths all the time. The physical is meaningless to her. It's a Gnostic viewpoint, because all that matters to her is the transcendent.
It's meaningful only in terms of its usefulness.
Yes, right.
It's a tool.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow, I never made that connection. It's obvious once you say it, David, but that's Ensign Lynch's flesh on Data's arm, maybe.
Yeah, right?
Well, I mean, it's possible. Of course, it could. I have a feeling, though. I feel like that flesh might be rooted in some of the DNA that I have lying around, but I think it's grown, because we see that small patch on Data, and I think maybe it's stretched and grown out onto him, and not just totally engrafted.
But
maybe.
But it's,
I
don't know. Well, so what do you think about what's going down on the planet? In this case, it's Earth, but because the flawed and weak and organic, I think, are all adjectives that could be applied to the other person who makes the salvation possible in this film, or one of the others, because I think Zefram Cochrane has to be, as I said before, persuaded to do this thing, even though he obviously is flawed, as we all are, and he's weak, at least in terms of his dependence on alcohol. He's right to protest to people in the Enterprise crew who are lionizing him, talking about, I went to Zefram Cochrane High School and Barclay wants his autograph, and these are all wonderful moments. But he's right to say, I'm not that guy. Doesn't he have a line like, this guy you're talking about, I don't know who that is?
I've got it written down, actually. Yeah, Cochrane says, please. So Riker has just pointed out the moon and how in his day there's a bunch of people living there. And Cochrane says, please don't tell me it's all thanks to me. I've heard enough about the great Zefram Cochrane. I don't know who writes your history books or where you get your information from, but you people have got some pretty funny ideas about me. You all look at me as if I'm some kind of saint or visionary or something. And Riker says, I don't think you're a saint, Doc, but you did have a vision, and now we're sitting in it. And Cochrane says, you want to know what my vision is? Dollar signs. Money. I didn't build this ship to usher in a new era for humanity. You think I want to go to the stars? I don't even like to fly. I take trains. I built this ship so that I could retire to some tropical island filled with naked women. That's Zefram Cochrane. That's his vision. This other guy you keep talking about, this historical figure, I never met him. I can't imagine I ever will.
But then what's Riker's next line?
Yeah, he says, someone once said, don't try to be a great man, just be a man, and let history make its own judgments.
Okay.
And so
that was the Borg Collective saying that line right there.
Doesn't that speak to the point we make on this podcast all the time, though, that all we have to do, and I don't mean that in the dismissive sense, because it's a great responsibility and privilege, is be human. All we have to do is what we can. And I wish maybe even the movie spent a little bit more on this, that it's not about Cochrane stepping into the role of being a visionary. It's just him stepping into the role of being himself, and that's good enough. And that's what unlocks this future for humanity. And in a sense, it doesn't matter that wasn't his vision. although I suspect at some level, maybe, I think Cochrane he's having a really bad day,
Right.
and I think maybe he's giving into. We're all mixtures of cynicism and optimism and hope and
Yes.
despair, and I think maybe he's he's at a low for sure, but be that as it may, in a sense it doesn't matter because he's going to be used to usher in this future, and I think just that's an important point of the action I wanted to lift up. That Data saves the day by sparing this first ever warp capable ship that humanity's launching toward the stars. Something else is in place there for Data to save, and so it's all of a piece.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and I think almost to hammer that point home, you've got Cochrane immediately thereafter saying rhetorical nonsense.
Yeah.
And then you sort of see him realize, like, oh gosh, I wonder. And then he says, "Who said that?" Because I think he knows that what the answer Riker is going to give, and Riker says, "You did 10 years from now." I think Cochrane is starting to realize, like, oh gosh, this is gonna be me, isn't it? Yeah, I think he knows,
and maybe he can. Maybe he's starting to. He could hear himself saying that, because that's kind of what he's been saying in a very, very, again, very cynical, very over the top, kind of crass way throughout the whole movie. He's kind of been saying that. Don't worry about that. Just
right.
But he's
That's
forgotten
true.
the other part about just be a man.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
I think I didn't get that from the scene, but I think that's very interesting. But yeah, he's definitely. People have objected to the portrayal of Zefram Cochrane in this movie, and I really think, like you say, we're kind of catching him on a bad day, a really bad day. He's kind of at the bottom right now. But you notice they even have him put that spacesuit on over his regular clothes to remind us that guy in the spacesuit that we saw in the original series, that is still this guy, and that he has that in him. And I love that he shows up later in Enterprise. And we can see, and the fact that that Riker says that about what he's going to say in 10 years tells us that we're seeing a character at the beginning of an arc of progression, that he's going to change, and he will become that guy that we saw. And
Yes.
I think that's really cool, and it gives Cochrane kind of this redemption arc. And as we're talking about all this, about this person who's greatly lionized and who's greatly respected, and yet he looks at those representations of himself and says, "Well, I don't really recognize that," and I think a lot about Gene Roddenberry. We've talked on the show very much about how flawed and weak he was, and all of his shortcomings and failures, as well as having this vision that he eventually maybe bought into more than he did when he started the series. Who knows, and I even go back and I think about Jesus, and I think about how human Jesus is. We talk about the incarnation that we were talking about with Data, and that's true. And yet, the scriptures say he was fully human. And fully human, as we've been talking about, isn't just having a fleshly body.
Right.
It's being a human person with all the thoughts and fears and learning involved in that. The gospel even says that he learned, that he grew in wisdom, right? In wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and humans. And that is a process for him. And that there's this very elevated, and I deal with this a lot in my work with Jesus films, there's this very elevated view of Jesus that we can have, sort of floating an inch off the ground. Martin Scorsese said about his portrayal of Jesus in Last Temptation of Christ, when my Jesus walks into the room, he doesn't glow in the dark. There's definitely that candy box Jesus, that people talk about, that probably doesn't, the white, blonde-haired or light brown-haired, whatever guy, who's looking perfect all the time. that isn't a real depiction of Jesus at all. That can't be.
Right.
There's no human who walks around looking like that.
Yeah.
So if we were to see Jesus as he existed on this earth, no matter what our conception is, we'd probably be pretty surprised by who we found. And there's probably things that, even the way we read the Bible, we think certain things were said the certain ways, and oh, nope, that was different, That's very possible. But the point is that, as you said at the beginning of all this, Mike, that Zefram Cochrane's way of living into this great ideal was simply being himself.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, I think that's such a great idea. I quote Fred Rogers all the time: the greatest gift that you can give another person is your honest self. That being you, that you are not your failures, you are not your success. I was even thinking, sometimes when we fail at something, even something small, you might say, I'm a failure. Or we talk about someone who achieved something and say they were a great success. Well, no, you're not your failures. You're not your successes. You're you. You're a person who sometimes succeeds and sometimes fails. And the best thing you can do is to just go out there and try and be your honest self, the best you know how to be, in the direction toward where God might be leading you. And let the Spirit do the rest. And you never know what you might be able to accomplish and what you might be able to inspire somebody else to do and be. So I think that's great.
Speaking of failures and inspiring ones, I think we should probably talk about Picard too.
Yes. And his was the other story we talked about as we were setting this episode up with that flawed, weak, organic. We see Picard's flaws in this in such a stark way.
Right.
That many people have been very unsettled, just as they were with Cochrane, very unsettled by the portrayal of Picard in this film. And what do you guys think about it?
They're probably accustomed to your orders making sense.
Oh, I love that moment. I mean, talk about honesty. It's Lily's honesty that gets Picard to confront the depths to which he's sunk in this short span of time, And I mean, Worf couldn't even do it, really. If you were any other man, I'd kill you where you stand. And Picard still storms off the bridge into the ready room. And, I think Lily, I know in my discussions of the film and stuff I've read, maybe I've just been having and reading the wrong discussions, but I don't think Lily gets nearly enough attention.
Oh, man. Yeah.
I mean, Alfred Woodard, a great actor and does the role just a wonderful performance. But she is so important to this movie by being that moral conscience for Picard and speaking truth to him when he doesn't want to hear it. And, even a few moments after, even after he breaks the ships, he still is going to go down that path, right? And she gives up. Oh, see you around, Ahab. But it's that moment of it's Lily not being afraid to, and she's been in Picard's world literally only a very short while, but she's picked up on the vision. Right. He told her about it at the beginning. We've grown beyond the need for money and working to get stuff. I'm paraphrasing, but she's caught the vision, just like the people on the planet on Earth, the people on the planet, just like the people on Earth are trying to get Cochrane to catch his own vision. She's caught it, and now she's able to make Picard see it again.
Yeah. And what's beautiful about the way her character functions, and some people have said that Beverly should have been the one to go into the ready room and give Jean-Luc the talk. But I like that she brings this outsider's perspective.
Sometimes that's what you need.
Sometimes it's what you need. And I really appreciate, of course, also we get to have Alfred Woodard, so come on.
Right. Sorry, Gates.
I mean, I would love to have seen Gates do that scene, but Alfred Woodard is a gift to Star Trek, and so is that scene. That's one of the best scenes in all of Star Trek. It still moves me. I mean, I watched it this morning.
It's powerful.
It still moves me. It's beautiful. But I love the idea of Picard as Ahab, that she chooses Ahab to stab at him with, because that is the image of Khan.
Right.
In Star Trek 2.
I really like what Picard quotes out of Moby Dick, and I like that the fact that they are able to go at each other, sort of head to head, equal to equal. And I really love the quote that he gives just right out of Moby Dick, where he's talking about when he finally realizes what he's done, and he's talking himself down from this. I really love that quote and the way that he uses it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen Picard take classic literary texts before and recontextualize them. Like I think of the episode Hide and Q, where he is quoting Hamlet. He says, Hamlet would have said this with irony, but I say it with conviction. So he takes this... what a piece of work is man, that great speech. So he takes this passage from Moby Dick, and I think it's it's less of a recontextualization than that other one from Hide and Q is, because so much of it tracks. I mean, as Ahab wanted revenge against the whale for hurting him, Picard wants revenge against the Borg. Lily says that to him, and Melville's original passage is talking about Ahab striking out against the whale on behalf of all humanity. But Picard maybe sees himself as doing that. I mean, I think he would say he's doing that, but really his whole world, his whole existence has become at this point in the movie that trauma, that hurt. So so I think it's a very apt passage, and I think it's funny. Then Lily says she's never read the book, but it's clear just from what Picard is quoting from it. She gets it. She gets the analogy. Right. And then Picard goes on to interpret Melville a little bit for her, as I recall. I don't have that in front of me right now, but
that he wanted to get back at the whale for hurting him, and that he lost everything. He lost his ship
everything
and his life. And that's the interesting thing about this. We talked about what Picard has at stake and what he's trying to save and what the Borg are attacking. And the one thing he does have to do is he has to give something up. He has to sacrifice the Enterprise. And that's important. That's a big thing. He doesn't ultimately, but he plans to. He has to be willing to give it up.
He does. It's sort of taken away from him, but he not only plans to, he does. He initiates the self-destruct sequence, and he never turns it off. Data is the one that does that.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, that's what I mean, though, is that he doesn't ultimately lose the Enterprise, but he has to be willing to give it up to accomplish what he needs to. And he also changes his ways, because I think about that scene where the officer is down in the corridor. He's been injected by the Borg, and he's like, "Captain, help, please." And Picard's answer to that is to kill him.
Right.
Because, when they're setting out, he says, "You may encounter crew members who've been assimilated by the Borg. Do not hesitate to fire. Believe me, you will be doing them a favor." And just the very idea that he would say that he is in that kind of crisis mode, and that he's that committed to the idea that it's better to be dead than to be Borgified, is a really, really hard thing. It makes you wonder how he's feeling about his life at that point, because he was rescued, he was saved from the Borg. And at that point, I think he's the only person who has been. I don't know if 7 of 9. Of course, he doesn't know about that. Even if 7 of 9 has shown up in Voyager,
so far as we've encountered, he's the only one.
And so that's really interesting to see him willing to do that, feeling like he has to do that, and I think of that nightmare that he has in the beginning of the episode. And as soon as it's clear that the Borg really are on the ship, it's like he's actually living in that nightmare now. His nightmare is going to come home to roost. And we talk about people who've been through traumas, people who deal with PTSD, feeling like they're back in the space and time when the trauma took place.
Right.
And this is tantamount to, being in the room with your abuser. This is Picard at his most heightened sense of threat and of self-protection. And that self-protection, that desire for self-protection, comes out in that anger and that desire for vengeance, which is something that, of course, he's pushed down for a long time. And Lily calls him on that.
Yeah.
with yet another colorful metaphor. When he says, we've moved beyond, the need for revenge.
Right.
You're overselling your century a little bit there, sir. You know,
Yes, that's exactly the wording that she uses.
that's exactly the thing. She says, "Poppycock, balderdash."
I
sir.
call shenanigans.
Right. But it's true, and we
Yeah.
do see. I mean, we do see Picard's weakness. We do see, even as he's putting all this bluster and all this force and pushing so hard, that's really he's scared. He's scared out of his mind.
Yeah.
And just wanting to do anything he can to not only keep that threat from not coming to him or anyone else again, but also to just not let them win.
Right.
To not give in, to not give up, and he has to figure out, when to lay down his guns. I think of that shot of the phaser rifle inside the case that he's smashed. As he walks out with Lily, that he's taking a different tack. And he's planning to destroy the ship, but it's a tack that has to say, okay, I've lost ground to the Borg.
Right.
I have to admit some level of defeat. And it's often that we do have to admit some level of defeat and give up something that we care about in order to have an ultimate victory, or in order to move forward, to gain and to do the right thing. And Picard has to go back and decide to honor Data and their friendship and their connection, and to be the man who will try to rescue someone, like he didn't try to rescue the officer in the corridor or Ensign Lynch.
And I think that's the thing, is that we're seeing him basically. Lily is able to give him, bind him up, and sort of speak truth to him that reminds him of what Starfleet is, who he is, but specifically to remind him that that line that he said about "you'll be doing them a favor" is wrong, and the first reaction the first moment that he's able to actually put that realization into action is when he goes and saves Data. The whole from the moment he sort of decides to blow up the ship, right up until the moment when he walks into the engine room to save Data, he is, and beyond, he is a different man at that point. And good grief, Alfred Woodard just makes it so believable that she has not only called him out for his own hypocrisy, but also bound up a deep wound within him in a way that he sort of is able to process and deal with and move forward and act on in this, really dramatically quick succession, but in a real way where he's able to actually go down and save Data in a way that even leaves the Borg Queen to say, "Such a noble creature," a quality we sometimes lack. That entire thing is sort of predicated upon Lily saying what she says and making him see reason and making him confront his own stated goals and his own stated values and morals. And I think that sort of progression of from Ahab to rescuing Data is just a beautiful way of seeing how a wounded person can be put back together. And granted, it's in a really compressed time frame for movie purposes, but it still does really track very well, because it really is him using his own wounds instead of for destruction, to destroy the Borg. He's using those wounds now to save Data and to abandon his own life in hopes of saving Data's.
And let me just put that in a little bit of context too. I appreciated that you used that term, to bind up, which I think you're specifically referencing there, probably Isaiah, Isaiah 61:1, which is the passage that Jesus read in the temple when he sort of proclaimed himself as Messiah to the people of his hometown and was ran out of the room for it, ran out of town for it, was run out of town for it, I should say.
Right.
But I'll read that. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners. That's there's, I mean, that's part of the work of the Messiah. The reason he's coming out as Messiah when he reads that is because that's a messianic text.
Right.
You know, the Spirit of God is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and freedom to the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of our God's vengeance, to comfort all who mourn, to console the mourners in Zion. I mean, all these things, to give them beauty for ashes. I mean, so I think it's a beautiful moment of Picard rescuing his humanity, and the fact that very specifically and I think very clearly mirrors something that is from a messianic text, that is a proclamation of what Jesus comes to do.
Yes.
I think there's a good reason for that. You know, I think there's a good reason for that.
It's also significant, and this goes to your point, Kevin, that when Jesus quotes that text in the synagogue from Isaiah, the phrase he does not include is the year of the Lord's vengeance.
Yeah, I was just reading that off the screen and like, oh yeah, I didn't remember.
Yeah,
that was
because
in
in Luke 4, that phrase is very much not there.
Yeah.
Jesus is much as Picard is recontextualizing Melville, Jesus is recontextualizing that passage from Isaiah to say, today this has been fulfilled in your hearing, and it includes lots of things, but it is not about
and let's even
God's vengeance.
And let's even say, I'm so glad you pointed that because when I read that, I was like, that doesn't sound right.
Right.
But let's just say that he's removing vengeance from that. And you remember the scriptures say that the Lord says, vengeance is mine.
Yeah.
And here is the Lord saying, vengeance is mine, and vengeance is mine to give up.
Yeah.
Vengeance is mine to lay down, much like Picard lays down his phaser rifle.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
I think that's beautiful. Utterly beautiful.
I think I also want to point out too that we're talking about binding up, and I think I unintentionally chose exactly the right word here because, or divinely, I suppose,
right?
Because what we're talking about with binding up, we're talking about wrapping a wound. We're talking about making it so that you can keep going, so that you can finish the mission or escape or whatever. We're not talking about complete healing.
Right.
Picard is not completely healed of all of his hatred. He's not, completely healed of the PTSD of being assimilated and having all of his humanity and identity stripped from him. He's not back to normal. He's not back to one again. He's not the bright-eyed, fresh-faced captain that we saw in Encounter at Farpoint again at that moment. Right. He is still who he is, and he still carries that trauma and those wounds. And what Lily is able to do is bind him up, keep him going long enough to be able to save his friend. And the healing comes later, but the binding up is what is happening here.
Well, and what's really interesting is I don't think there's a degree to which he never really escapes it. He's always changed by it, and we see that in Picard.
Yeah,
in the Picard series deals with that very much.
For sure.
That he's still wrestling with some of that, even here, 20 years, 30 years down the line.
But he does get some healing along the way.
He does, absolutely.
Not to get into spoilers for Picard, but there is a difference in the way that he is interacting with the Borg in that series than in First Contact. And I think that that's very intentional and showing how his healing is progressing. And again, like we're saying here, it isn't instantaneous, and it's not going to be. But the binding up can be effectual even in a short period of time, and accounting for the compression of time for a film.
Right. But the thing is that when you have a major trauma like that, when you have a major grief, when you have a major loss, yes, you will heal. But yes, you will also still carry that with you.
Yes.
I don't ever want... I feel like too often in Christian culture, we promise healing as though your hurts just completely go away and you never feel like they're there anymore. I was even talking on this week's Advent episode about grief. And I likened it to this cloud that hangs over your head, or that I don't know exactly how I said it, but that there's a cloud that hangs over your head when you're in a time of trauma, when you're in a time of grief, and that there's always, there's always a rainstorm that dampens a certain corner of your heart.
Yeah.
That will always be there, and I feel like that healing, we have to understand that especially even just doctrinally, healing on this side of the culmination of salvation, the culmination of creation, the consummation of salvation, I should say, on this side of it, can only ever be so complete.
Yeah.
Can only ever be so full. And that's why we always long for what's next. And that's going to relate to this week's Advent episode, those of you who are keeping up.
and even in his new resurrection life, Jesus still bears his wounds.
That's right.
I mean, they're taken up, and there's a hymn that talks about his wounds in beauty glorified. They become marks of beauty and no longer just marks of torture and pain and defeat.
Which is all we're promised here is binding up. Yeah. That's what Jesus reads in Luke 4, that all we're promised is the binding up. The healing comes later. The healing comes maybe during this life, but not guaranteed until the next one. Right. And I think that's a thing that we're seeing Picard deal with now in his eponymous series, but we're seeing him deal with in First Contact as well. That we can be functional again if not healed. We can be in some way made to feel whole, even though we are not made to feel healed.
Right. We can be as complete as we can be, because nothing here is ever complete.
Right.
Just like nothing here is ever permanent.
Yes.
There's a lack of completeness too, and so. Yeah, tune in this Sunday. We'll be talking about that in the Advent series. That's pretty cool that came up. But anyway, yeah, it's a beautiful film. It's a great exploration of Picard and Data's characters and of Zefram Cochrane's. Just like the Borg do, they bring us to the core of what it means to be human, because they attack us at the core of our humanity. And their whole goal is to take our humanity away. And that's why they're the most insidious villain in Star Trek, the most feared villain in Star Trek, because they give us a faith that is worse than death, and that's the whole thrust of the threat of the zombie, is a fate worse than death. Which is becoming something that's going to perpetuate the harm that's been done to you, not only to you but to others through you, without your consent, and that's a rough thing. That's a really scary thing. But in confronting that, then we are able to come at that with our core humanity, to find ourselves again, to not be overcome by the fear. We can't switch our emotion chips off like Data can.
Right.
And that's why Picard envies him. But we can work through those emotions and come through that fear and that anxiety, that panic that Picard is in through most of this episode. Rising panic, I think, is what I would call Picard's state throughout this film. When he's gunning Ensign Lynch and the other Borg drone, which may have also been a officer down, when he's gunning them down, the way Patrick plays that, there's just such this mix of emotions. There's the intensity of the moment, of turning this machine gun on somebody, but there's also there's pain, and there's struggle, and it's pushing something out that's been in there for a long time, but at the same time dreading it. There's fear. There's so much going on in that moment. That's very much a cycle that people have to go through a lot of times when they're dealing with trauma and when they're confronting things that are difficult like that. But that he is able to push past that, to move past that, and to find himself, his true self on the other side, is so important, and such a great picture for all of us.
And I think also a really good reminder to be binding up one another.
Yes, absolutely. And to have compassion on people.
Yeah.
Because, I find it hard to have compassion on somebody who turns a gun on somebody else. But they need compassion too. Everybody needs it, if they can receive it. You know, that's why we love our enemies,
Right.
even and especially when they persecute us, when they hurt us.
Amen.
Yeah.
It's also a good reminder to blow up the damn ship.
That's true.
So, Kevin, do you have an
Yes.
audience question for us?
I do. I'm going to bring the audience question this time, and we'll see what we think of it. So our audience question, I'm going to. We were trying to think of an audience question this week. I'm going to unearth an older audience question, and apply it to what we're talking about now. We had a question some time ago that said, you mentioned a few times now Star Trek's view of the sanctity of life and using terraforming, that you have to be sure you won't be potentially interfering with life and the potential of intelligent life evolving. And where does that leave our responsibility with Earth animals? And do we have a responsibility to care for and aid animals to live life and develop, because life could evolve intelligence? What about eating animals? All that sort of thing. So we talked about before about the life of, how do we handle this idea of the sanctity of life with animals on Earth? But I would like to say, how do we apply this ethic of the sanctity of life to the Borg?
Interesting. Well, I think the series Picard gives us a particularly, compelling answer to that question, with its portrayal of the XBs, the X-Borgs, as people who are recovering from a deep trauma, people who need extensive support to be able to re-enter any sort of normal society or even normal level of functioning, as beings, as sentient beings. I think that episode, or that series, gives us maybe a harder way to go, because it's saying these are still people and you still got to treat them like people. And I think that lines up very well with the way that God intends or explicitly commands for us to value people as holders of the Imago Dei, as bestowed with the image of God. And I think that there's a significant challenge in the commands that God gives, and I think that the challenge falls upon each one of us, and in various different ways we have to interpret how we're going to do that. And gosh, I don't know that there's any way of dealing with the Borg that doesn't involve that.
It's interesting. It makes me think about the ending of Best of Both Worlds Part 2. And I know some people find the command Picard tells Data to give the Borg to sleep anticlimactic, but I think it's a beautiful solution to the problem. And yes, they blow up the cube too, but isn't in some ways that's a very Star Trekky resolution to the problem? Is we'll just tell our enemies to go to sleep, and that'll be the end of it.
Like a neck pinch.
I mean, I don't know how Starfleet Command would react to being told, as the Borg cube is buried on Earth, well, you have to treat them like people. And of course, these are very real discussions in the real world about, some Christians are pacifists, some aren't. The theories of just war have gone back and forth throughout Christian history, and self-defense and things like that. But I don't know, the question, and Star Trek's general philosophy of treating others as worthy of, treating other living sentient beings as worthy of compassion and respect, does make me think that ending to Best of Both Worlds it comes pretty close.
Yeah.
Well, and it interests me because it's very difficult. Do we come to a point? I feel like we come to a point with the Borg where there's nothing we can do. We are pushed to the limit of our options, and the only way to keep more people from being consumed by them is that some of them are going to die. and there's nothing we can do about it. It's either that or let them take over. So they put us at that very, very close crisis point. And so I think we have to always make that judgment of like, where are we going to go with this crisis point? Because we have a responsibility not just to the people who've been taken by the Borg, but the people who might be taken by them in the future, and trying to hold that line. And I think Jean-Luc in this movie maybe goes to the wrong side of that line for the first part. You know, maybe he shouldn't have killed that officer in the hallway. Maybe he shouldn't have gunned down Ensign Lynch. You know, maybe that wasn't at a crisis point where that had to be done, even though that's a fulcrum of the story. It's still
he gets something out of Lynch, right?
He does. He gets information about what they're planning,
Yeah.
and so that helps him strategize an attack. But of course, that plan fails, and he ultimately has to take the fail-safe measure of just getting the heck out of Dodge. So
that's true.
You know, he could have done that to begin with. You know, he could have started there. He could have abandoned ship and blown it up before anybody on his crew got assimilated. You know, he could have taken that tack. Of course, then his entire crew is trapped in the 21st century. Right. But hey, it's Star Trek.
May be a fate worse than assimilation.
I don't know.
The century's young. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, but it is true that, I mean, a lot of those questions, there are those kind of gray places, and I don't always know what the right thing is to do, and that's why we always just have to do the best we can. You know.
Yeah.
I think of Kirk in I think it's Into Darkness. He says, I don't know, you know, what the right thing, I don't know what I should do. All I know is what I can do. You know, sometimes we have those, I think sometimes we have those moments where we just have to see what am I capable of, you know, and do our best. But yeah, I do think that there could be a lot more, you know, in the episode I, Borg, we talk about, you know, giving the Borg this computer virus, and we talk about that as wiping out the Borg, but I think, might people have survived that? Might that have attacked the system that enslaves these people and not the people themselves? Might that have been a solution that might not have led to the death of the Borg? And they're also, you know, kind of respecting the Borg as a race at that point, but the Borg aren't a race. You know, the Borg are a computer program that's gone out of control.
Right.
They're just this massive abusive enslaving force. That's not a race, you know. That's not a culture. So
am I correct in that we haven't really been given an origin story for the Borg canonically?
Not canonically,
like on screen.
Beta canon, yes. Alpha canon.
Yeah, I think there was a Strange New World story and the books Strange New World story, and there've been comics and other things. I think
the Destiny book actually is the Destiny series.
Okay,
yeah.
I hope we never get one on screen. I would kind of like to leave that
kind of cool to have it mysterious
as a wondering. But anyway.
But anyway, it is interesting, and of course, obviously, like a lot of these questions we talk about, it's a good thing that this doesn't exist in reality, and we're not put in this actual situation. But thinking about these situations might help us to think about how we deal with others, and whether we really have to either be violent with guns, or be violent with our words and our actions in other ways. We can injure people when we don't have to, and so. Thinking about, and we usually injure people most when we other them, when we think of them as less than us or other than us, in some kind of distancing way. So being able to close that gap is important.
And I think that if we are to, if the Borg were to actually exist, I think that the message of Jesus would still apply, and that his purpose on earth being to proclaim liberty for the captives would apply to them in particular.
I was thinking of that when I was reading from Isaiah, proclaiming liberty to the captives, like Borg drones are captives. We need to proclaim liberty to them. So it'd be interesting to see Star Trek deal with that more. But anyway, thanks for the question from the past.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you again.
So, feel free. We encourage you every episode, but please send us questions because we need them. We really enjoy answering them, and it's a good part of the show. So,
Yeah.
all right. So, Mike, what do we have coming up next week?
Well, next week, among other things, we'll be talking about Discovery Season 4, Episode 3, Choose to Live, and we'll be celebrating the 35th anniversary of Star Trek IV, the one with the whales.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, lighter fare next week, folks. It's
Well,
just
Maybe.
whales.
maybe.
It's just whales and
Maybe.
comedy and the impending end of humankind. So,
Right.
just basic fun stuff. Yeah.
Well, but Choose to Live, that's Koat Malat right there. The Romulan
Yeah.
order of
nice.
warrior nuns. Yeah.
Ooh, hey. Oh, that teases some possibilities there, doesn't it?
It does.
That's exciting. Well, and also between now and next episode, be sure to join me on Sunday for our next Advent episode. I'm basing them a little more on the liturgical themes this year. So this past week was hope, and next week we'll be talking about peace. So come and join us for that, or come and join me. And in the meantime, please like, share, rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you can do that.
Also, send us your questions. You can find us at Gospel Trek Pod on both Twitter and Instagram, and The Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook, or you can email us at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to discuss your question on the show, maybe even twice.
Also, you can support the show by using the support button on anchor.fm/GATST, or by going to our Patreon, patreon.com/gospeltrekpodcast. You can support the show, help us make good content, and get some cool perks as well.
And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being with us, and until next time,
I'm Mike Poteet.
I'm David Atwell.
and I'm Kevin Sinise, and as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.